Can data-driven infrastructure transform sustainability from a buzzword into an operational reality? That's the big question today because enterprises are at a crossroads.
IoT and AI both can provide you the big data and insights from that data, then that can actually make all of this transformation and transform the way utilities currently, functions. And that's a lot of promise that AI and IoT bring to the table.
Looking ahead, what are the biggest barriers to adoption in, let's say, the next 12 to 18 months?
The biggest barriers, as have been with tech in the past, will continue to remain the same. The biggest barrier is literacy, digital literacy, and trust. So I am, and you can speak about it from the perspective of the user who doesn't know how to interact with technologies and doesn't trust when a message comes to them. They're like, okay, should I interact with it? Especially when you're moving money from one place to another, when people are not financially literate, it creates a lot of problems and also trust problems.
Can data-driven infrastructure transform sustainability from a buzzword into an operational reality? That's the big question today because enterprises are at a crossroads. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tech Transform, the podcast where we explore how technology is reshaping the enterprise world. I'm your host, Trisha Pillay, podcast producer and editor here at EM360 Tech. And today we are exploring how enterprises facing climate pressure, aging grids, and rising demand can leverage IoT and AI, not just for survival, but for transformation. Joining me is Akanksha Sharma, head of the Climate Tech and Digital Utilities program at GSMA. Akshana's work sits at the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and critical infrastructure. We couldn't have asked for a better guest today to tackle the topic. Akshana, it's great to have you here. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Thank you, Trisha, for inviting me to the podcast. I am really grateful to you and excited to join this podcast and speak to your audiences. My name is Akanksha, and I am the head of climate tech at the GSMA. My background is has always been in research. I started off with utilities-based research in India. When I moved to London, GSMA has pretty much been the only company that I've worked with. I'm running into my 14th year now with the GSMA. So it's been my home. And when I came here, I sort of drifted and continued on the research bit, but moved more towards mobile tech as the pillar. And through my years here, gradually, I started working on our connectivity for good arm of work at the GSMA. And there I was sort of consulting the Connectivity for Good team, helping them sort of find digital solutions and how they can have impact in low and middle income countries. So that is how I have gradually, sort of grown in the company and gone on to lead two programs at the GSMA Mobile for Development, which is part of the GSMA Foundation. And the two programs are one which is focused on climate tech, and another one called Digital Utilities, which specifically looks at the issues in urban resilience.
That's such a strong foundation, and thanks for setting the scene. But let's zoom out for a moment. From your perspective, how are AI and IoT transforming our wider enterprise landscape, and what can enterprises learn from that?
The 2020s are sort of unquestionably a decade where Internet of Things, IoT, they are set to scale. I told you a bit about my work at the GSMA. I've also worked at our intelligence or data arm, which is called the GSMA Intelligence, and that sort of estimates a lot of industry numbers, particularly in the mobile industry. And they estimate that the total number of IoT connections will more than double between 2021 and 2030. So we'll reach 37.4 billion, IoT connections. So it's going to transform the world. It is transforming the world. And then layering on top of it is AI, which, as we know, is really out there. What we are seeing with AI, differently from the sort of previous waves of tech transformation, is the innovation cycle is shortening. So think about personal computing. It was like, it took good 20, 25 years to sort of mature. Then came smartphones. They took their own time. But when you think about AI, it has shifted things in the last, 5 to 7 years. And as Ben Evans sort of puts it, it has entered, and he says this about ChatGPT. He says ChatGPT has entered mainstream consciousness at an unprecedented pace. And I often give this example, like, you go to Indian Twitter, you see, like, there is an image that somebody has posted and people are posting under it, Grok, can you please explain what this picture says? It has become something that people are using really quickly, really at pace. And pretty much, if you look at enterprises, pretty much everyone is thinking about how can it bring operational efficiencies for the enterprise. Some know it, others are still figuring it out. Those who know it are also figuring it out. So it's an interesting space there. But what we know is that it has immense potential. It is already showing promise in terms of how enterprises can achieve scale and make things simple to use. I just gave the example of that Indian Twitter thing. The large scale computing and operations are happening on the back end. When it goes to the user, what both AI and IoT are doing is it is making it simpler for the user to interact with them. And you asked about utilities. Utilities can learn a lot. It's another thing that utilities are a different beast. They've existed for times immemorial, I think now. So it's very difficult to kind of for them to move from their legacy systems to the new technologies. But equally, they are facing the same issues as other enterprises, right? Their services are unaffordable to people. Oftentimes, energy prices often go up. They are unreliable, especially when you think about water sanitation utilities. The way we've deployed our infrastructure is unplanned. It's unsafe. And IoT and AI both can provide you the big data and insights from that data, then that can actually make all of this transformation and transform the way utilities currently, function. And that's a lot of promise that AI and IoT bring to the table.
I think that's a very valuable perspective because it's clear that AI and IoT are reshaping not just operations, but the way enterprises think about the value of creation and long-term strategy. Let's move on to this and just building on what you just said. What are the main challenges enterprises are facing today in terms of operational efficiency and sustainability?
So for those who don't know what the GSMA is, we are an association of mobile operators. We represent the interests of about 1,000 mobile operators and businesses across the ecosystem. And therefore, when you're asking this question, I want to tackle this from the point of view of not big enterprises, but small and medium enterprises. At the GSMA Foundation and Mobile for Development, we do a lot of grant funding to small SMEs in low and middle income countries. So this is UK aid and Swedish aid money that we deploy in the form of grants, and we provide it to small and medium enterprises to test digital solutions in these countries. So these are all local entrepreneurs solving local challenges, particularly on climate. And when you look at these enterprises as well, the problems that they are facing in terms of operations are pretty much similar to what the bigger enterprises are facing. To top it, in low and middle income countries, they're also tackling challenges that intersect with infrastructure issues. So your banks are far. If you have to pay your bills, it means for a user, you're standing in a queue for hours and hours. Each activity that you're doing, the entire supply chain has some sort of a carbon footprint linked to it. And when I say carbon footprint, that's like linked to transportation, to material usage, cost of manufacturing, the waste that the enterprise is generating. All of these are problems that also sort of, sit, and they are bigger in low and middle income countries than in the West or more developed countries. So what, as I mentioned earlier, all of these issues are making things unaffordable for them. So who is going to bear the cost of manufacturing? Who will bear the cost of transporting the product? And who is, more importantly, going to maintain it? These are all issues that they face in terms of how to operate their businesses in these countries. Sustainability, which is the second part of your question, that doesn't even come to the minds of SMEs often. Either it is an afterthought, or it's just completely ignored altogether. That is because you work in such environments. And that is why I was saying, the whole issues around unaffordability, unreliability, unconnectedness, unsafe services, they're all sort of tackled by IoT, for example, which helps you remotely monitor an asset, remotely control an asset. So you're reducing the cost of manpower that is going and operating the devices. You're able to see it on a dashboard and how different things are performing from afar. Equally, for a user, you are giving it everything in the at the palm of their hands, and they can essentially use everything through their mobile phones in their language. Can even interact with, through IBR systems. If you have like 2G systems, they're able to interact by voice, and don't always have to type. So all of these technologies make it simpler for the users to interact with it and make it more operationally efficient for an SME that is operating in these countries and across the globe for that matter.
So I think that gives us some great context, and thank you for that. I mean, to compare the small enterprises, medium to big. But looking at it at the broader view, I'd like to get more specific. Could you maybe give us an example where AI and IoT have delivered measurable impact either in cost savings or environmental benefits?
Several, and that's pretty much what we try to test with the grant funds that we provide. So I'll give you an example of a company that we fund in Pakistan. It's called Bakhabar Kisan. It received funding from the GSMA Innovation Fund, and what they were trying to do was enhance their weather platform and provide smallholder farmers with real-time hyper-local weather information. They deployed some 150 plus weather stations across the country, working in the underserved rural areas. And what they were doing was they were incorporating AI algorithms for data analysis and pattern recognition. So what you could give then to the users is more accurate and timely weather forecast, hyper-local forecast, not just like given for the entire country. And helping them become more resilient. If you're a farmer, you're operating in these geographies, you don't know when it's going to rain, when do you want to harvest, when do you, are you overwatering your plants? These are all the issues that we don't often think of when we are, working on our laptops, but these are real problems for a big economic group, the part of the economy which smallholder farmers are. And you can use AI to make things simpler for them, making them resilient. What we saw was, that through our grant itself, they rapidly scaled their operations, and the member partners of the GSMA mobile operators, they came in with strategic partnerships, and we saw that within a span of 15 to 18 months, they onboarded additional 6 million users. They brought their user base to 12 million farmers in Pakistan. Huge number, huge change.
I think that's such a good example. It really shows how technology can move the needle in tangible ways, especially in Africa and Asia. I think that's such an amazing example. Honestly, it's so innovative. But following up on that, I like to have more standout cases where AI and IoT have directly helped enterprises, like I said before, environmental or compliance goals. Look at it from that aspect.
Maybe I go more broader rather than, a single example. So, digital is actually quite useful in the case of carbon markets on the whole. So Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, it establishes a mechanism for governments and private sector to engage in approaches that helps address the GHG emissions and provide cost-effective reductions there. And that includes carbon markets. For the governments, there are compliance markets, which are mandated for high emission industries. But smaller companies can also use the voluntary carbon markets, where they can volunteer. This is not just actually small companies and individuals too. They can voluntarily sort of purchase carbon credits and offset their emissions. So that is a provision that Article 6 makes. And it's a huge, huge opportunity for the global south, because these are countries that have not contributed a lot to climate change, but are suffering through the effects of climate change, and they are the most unprepared to deal with it. The effects of climate change are going to be seen everywhere, but these countries are most unprepared and have contributed the least. So what they need is climate finance to come to them, and carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, offer a big sort of avenue for that. The problem with carbon markets, however, is that there are concerns around quality of carbon credits, integrity. Are you transparent, or is it just greenwashing? That's always an issue. And when you're engaging with carbon markets, there is a requirement to monitor, report, and verify carbon credits. And that used to happen and still happens manually. And there's a lot of scope for fudging the data there or going wrong. That's where digital has a huge role to play. So DMRV solutions, which we call digital monitoring, reporting, and verification solutions, they provide a big opportunity. And these are using IoT, AI, satellites, drones, all of them to sort of accurately and real time collecting data. So if you are saying, okay, I'm engaging in XYZ activity, and therefore I'm eligible for carbon credits, I can report in very layman terms. I can say that I'm actually engaging in that activity. There could be pictures that could essentially be used for monitoring and reporting, and then it can be really verified that the projects that we are asking for carbon credits for have actually been deployed and have actually changed lives or abated emissions. So what digital is doing there, and digital, when I say digital, mainly IoT and AI, what it's doing is it's improving the accuracy of data. It is making it consistent. So you measure the same things consistently in the same way again and again and again. So it becomes a strong approach, and it becomes interoperable because you're using the same measurement techniques across, and then you can compare and contrast. So it sort of builds on the integrity, and kind of addresses the issues that traditional monitoring, reporting, and verification methods have had, whilst mitigating, again, coming back to the operational efficiency thing. When you are manually going and verifying everything, it is not operationally very efficient. When you deploy digital, not only is it indelible sometimes when you're using blockchain, but also the capacity, resource constraints that you have in manually doing this, that is taken care of by digital. And then you can use it more widely, more strongly, and leverage the climate finance that's available.
I just want to touch on what you said there. You said greenwashing. If you can explain that term, because for me, I was just like, hey, what's greenwashing? What do you mean by that?
It is a term whereby, big companies, it's often said that you are engaging on, let's say, a product or a service that could drive environmental benefits, but it becomes misleading because you're basically just trying to not going with a very strong quality measurement, whilst claiming that you have actually provided environmental benefits through your products and services. So what tends to happen is these claims become misleading, and it becomes more of an advertising or a marketing campaign, which often is not the intention, particularly when you're working with small and medium enterprises. But it's a very complex way of measuring it as well. Sometimes you're double counting things. Sometimes you are double reporting things, and people and SMEs might not know how to do it. So it could be intentional or unintentional as well. With all the good intentions that a company might have, it might either not be very effective because you are you are basically replacing one problem with another. Think um, think plastic straws or paper straws. Are they really solving a problem? The paper straws, are we generating more waste? Are we really thinking long enough? So oftentimes it could also be unintentional, but there are intentional examples of this as well.
So I think that's a good example. I think understanding these use cases really helps prepare as people plan their next steps. But also think when you look at the enterprises, it's just tick boxes, which
Yeah.
I wanted to understand. But thank you for that. But let's move on to this. Looking ahead, what are the biggest barriers to adoption in, let's say, the next 12 to 18 months?
The biggest barriers, as have been with tech in the past, will continue to remain the same. The biggest barrier is literacy, digital literacy, and trust. So I am, and you can speak about it from the perspective of the user who doesn't know how to interact with technologies and doesn't trust when a message comes to them. They're like, okay, should I interact with it? Especially when you're moving money from one place to another, when people are not financially literate, it creates a lot of problems and also trust problems. But if you look at it from the SME's perspective, as technologies are moving and the pace of technology change, the enterprises and their workforce is not able to keep itself sort of abreast with what's changing, and you're not able to change your own systems. You're not able to build the capacity of your own employees. So oftentimes the employees are also a big barrier in the adoption of technology. Adoption of these bigger technologies also come with the risk of workforce reduction or workforce repurposing. So people will be moved into newer jobs. They need to build their skill set to move to the other job. So for utilities, ultimately we are a bunch of people trying to solve a problem. That's the way economies work, right? And if you're not preparing our workforce for what's coming, or if you're not preparing a user base for what's coming, that is going to be the biggest barrier. I was talking to my husband last week, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, the autonomous vehicles, they are going to take over the world." And I'm like, that is an 80s, 90s concept. You could build an autonomous vehicle that could come on the road, but if you don't have the road, if you don't have the traffic signals working properly, talk about the countries in the global south. These are like more core, fundamental, foundational issues that we haven't solved. So any technology will face that barrier of foundations not being strong, and that becomes the biggest barrier in the adoption and in the overall supply chain as well.
I think it's clear that adoption isn't just about buying the tech, but like you said, it's about aligning people, processes, strategy, and whatever other elements you need to put in to make it work. So let's move on to this. To wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our audience? And if you had to make one bold prediction, what would it be?
That's a lot of responsibility. Takeaway, I think, is I have worked in this sector for many years now. And I think the biggest takeaway is that often when we are thinking of innovation, a new jargon comes into play, and then everybody is slapping it onto their products and solutions. There came a time where everybody was using blockchain. There was a time where people were labeling their solutions as AI, and they were basically just Excels with some formulas running behind. What tends to happen with new jargons coming in is we dabble with it, we try to slap it onto our products and solutions without much use. So I think the takeaway for anybody, any enterprise working and thinking about incorporating AI and IoT in their solutions is to start with the why. Not just that, we need to do it because we need to be compliant to the norms of the industry, but more about thinking of, do we need it? And if we do need it, are there going to be positive or negative, intended or unintended consequences of using technology? We may be able to use a very simplistic method and connect with our audiences, or provide services to our users. You don't need to have AI when you can do something over an SMS, if SMS is something the users rely more on. And that'll take time for them to sort of build their capacity and move. So I think that is the biggest takeaway and my message for enterprises out there. Second thing is, especially with AI, privacy and ethics need to be kept in mind. We often tend to ignore them in places where regulations haven't caught up, because we are trying to innovate. Yeah, that's an innovator's dilemma. You have to test things out, and you have to sometimes put these things on the side. But we know AI enough to know that ethics, if ignored, can have really, really negative consequences on us as a race altogether. In terms of the consumption of water and energy, for example, for the use of AI, it's got to be a bit mindful in the way we approach it. And the bold prediction, the world is about to change through climate change and through technology. So we need to sort of marry the two and be judicious about the use of tech, especially for climate change.
Akanksha, thank you so much for joining me today. I think that was such a beautiful way of your insights and how you were able to show how AI and IoT are reshaping critical infrastructure has been incredibly valuable. I appreciated the way you unpacked this topic, and more importantly, the practical opportunities that lie ahead and how you spoke about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To our Tech Transform community, thank you for tuning in to another episode. We'll be back next week with more conversations at the intersection of technology, transformation, and enterprise innovation. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, rate, and share. Join the conversation on X and LinkedIn at EM360 Tech. It's on the screen now, or head over to our website for more daily insights. Until next time, stay curious and stay ahead of the trends.